أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلا الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم. إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فأززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أتخذ من دونه آلية إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا مهذرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها هبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملت أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذرية في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشاء نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آيات من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا وللذين آمنوا ونطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخثمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قول من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم أن لا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أزل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تأكلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لتمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانة فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يأكلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويهك القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند مهزرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم يرى الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هم خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحيي الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون. صلاة اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. كل أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات. سورة المباركة الفاتحة.
بی بی زینب سلام اللہ علیہا بآواز بلند صلوات. خواہر حسین بنت فاطمہ، خواہر حسین بنت فاطمہ، خواہر حسین بنت فاطمہ، خواہر حسین بنت فاطمہ. کیا بتائیں کہ زینب کی کیا شان ہے، کیا بتائیں کہ زینب کی کیا شان ہے. یہ نہ ہوتی تو مر جاتا اسلام بھی، مٹ گیا ہوتا خالق کا پیغام بھی. کھا گئی ہوتی صبح کو پھر شام بھی، کوئی لیتا نہ اللہ کا نام بھی. دین ہے یہ بھی زینب کا احسان ہے، کیا بتائیں کہ زینب کی کیا شان ہے. کربلا ہے ندا اور منادی ہے یہ، دو اماموں کی ایک ساتھ ہادی ہے یہ. راج کرنے کی بچپن سے عادی ہے یہ، دو جہاں کی بڑی شاہزادی ہے یہ. بادشاہ وفا جس کا دربان ہے، کیا بتائیں کہ زینب کی کیا شان ہے. اس کے خطبے خطابت کے سردار ہے، اس کے نانا شریعت کے سردار ہے. باپ اور ماں شرافت کے سردار ہے، دو بڑے بھائی جنت کے سردار ہے. چھوٹا بھائی وفاؤں کا سلطان ہے، کیا بتائیں کہ زینب کی کیا شان ہے. اور بے ابا ہے یہی فخر آل ابا، بے ردائی ہے جس کی وفا کی ردا. اس کا ممنون ہے دو جہاں کا خدا، اس کے بارے میں کہتے ہیں خود کربلا. محسن دین پر تیرا احسان ہے، کیا بتائیں کہ زینب کی کیا شان ہے. وہ محمد جو ہے خاتم الانبیاء، جس کو کہتی ہے دنیا حبیب خدا، جس کا داماد ہے زیغم کبریا، جس کی بیٹی ہے خیر النساء فاطمہ، اس محمد کے دل کا یہ ارمان ہے، کیا بتائیں کہ زینب کی کیا شان ہے، کیا بتائیں کہ زینب کی کیا شان ہے۔ زندہ باد، زندہ باد، زندہ باد، مرد آباد۔ ہے شجاعت کی ملکہ اسی کا لقب، اس کے قدموں میں ہے سرزمین عرب، کربلا بھی ہے زندہ اسی کے سبب، اس کی مدحت کرے خود محمد کا رب، عقل اس کے فضائل پہ حیران ہے، کیا بتائیں کہ زینب کی کیا شان ہے۔ خواہر حسین بنت فاطمہ، خواہر حسین بنت فاطمہ، صلوات۔
For the safety of all the Muslims, for the safety of everybody, for the safety of our holy places, for all those in need of du'as, especially those who are sick near and far. Let us all recite 5 times Ayah Yujibu. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibu mustarra iza da'ahu wa yakshifu as-su'. Amma yujibu mustarra iza da'ahu wa yakshifu as-su'. أما يجيب مضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب مضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فكل أرواح المؤمنين إن شفى مريض وإن سورة الفاتحة. الفاتحة. بر حبیب خدا ختم الانبیاء محمد و آل محمد صلوات. صل على محمد و آل محمد. الله
A third salawat in honor of Lady Zainab alayha salam with your loudest of voices. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبا القاسم المصطفى محمد. وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله، صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله صلى الله عليك أيتها الصابرة العقيلة المظلومة صلى الله تعالى عليك أيتها الشهيدة زينب الكبرى وعلى روحك وبدنك الطاهرة صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين خصوصا سيدي ومولاي كفيل الهواشم قمر بني هاشم أبا الفضل العباس السلام عليكم جميعا يا شهداء كربلاء ورحمة الله وبركاته أما بعد يقول الله في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولا تحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء عند ربهم يرزقون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. Born 3 years after the birth of her oldest brother Al-Hassan, 2 years after that moment, she was presented in that place in the holy city of Medina, submitting to the will of God within her confines, and her 2 brothers, born 1 year after, who would be her role model on a day in which everyone forgot her, 1 year after the birth of her older brother Hussein, and born in the 6th year of Hijrah in that holy household. The couple, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen and Sayyida Zahra, were deciding to name who this would be and how she would be known forever. Lady Zahra presented to Amir al-Mu'mineen that he should decide to name her. However, the Imam replied back, I will refer this to my master and leader, the Holy Prophet of Islam, let him decide. They approached the Holy Prophet, rather the Prophet approached them upon hearing the news of his first granddaughter, and the first to make him a grandfather from the daughters and the great-grandchildren that would live on from her, legends and scholars. Many have not studied the descendants that came after her. Nonetheless, the Holy Prophet of Islam approached and he said, and who am I to name her when I await the orders from the heavens? And the name came down. Her name will be known as Zainab. Many have postulated the theories. However, one of them rings true and strong. Zainab, etymologically, is a compound word. It is from the word zinat abiha, the adornment to the eyes of her father. Thus, she would continue to live the legacy of her father, such that on that dreadful day, even her greatest adversaries said, is it her walking or is it Abu al-Hasan? For she carries the same stride and walk as the man that we knew, Amir al-Mu'mineen himself. She became the adornment of her father. And indeed, the relationship between Ali ibn Abi Talib and Lady Zainab al-Kubra is unmatched completely. Many have not genuinely appreciated a father-daughter relationship until they've studied the relationship between Ali and Zahra, and Ali and Fatima rather. And of course, Lady Zahra, an extreme symbolic figure who would then inspire her to be outspoken, just as her mother was outspoken when her rights were usurped. A glimpse in Islamic history shows us the nature of this relationship bear the following. Many fathers do not give the time to spend the valuable moments with their daughters to even the degree of teaching them the basics. Many will simply lump this responsibility and thrust it upon the mother. But a father's role in the life of their daughter cannot be replaced. Studies clearly have shown this, that the most successful families are the nuclear families, where you have a father who is a father of a father, a man that is upright, disciplined, role model figure, masculine in the needs and the areas necessary, and a mother likewise as well. This formulates the most blissful of families. And of course, you can never find a man unmatched in his character and quality like Amir al-Mu'mineen, and a lady symbolic in her gestures of iman through her behavior and dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But let us give a glimpse into that relationship. One day, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib was speaking to Lady Zainab, a young child Lady Zainab at the time, approximately no older than a year probably, possibly 1 or 2 years. And we see that he asks her, "My beloved Zainab, who is the most beloved in your eyes? Who do you love the most?" Many fathers will ask their children this, well, who do you love the most? Do you love mother, father? And of course, the mother wants to hear that she says, "I love my mom the most," then the dad. And the dad wants to hear the same thing, "I love you the most," then my mom. Look at the reply. She says, "Father, I love Allah the most." Then he asked her, "Who do you next love the most?" She says, "I love you." He then asks her, "How can you have two loves in your heart? How do you explain that?" She replied, "Father, it's because of you I loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's because of Allah I loved you." Such a relationship from the early years reflects to us that this individual is no ordinary individual. Ya subhanallah. Another tradition shows us Imam Ali, Amir al-Mu'mineen, began to teach her how to count. These are the basics. Every child deserves to have these lovely moments shared and experienced with. And that is why a great emphasis is placed on the children who are motherless, fatherless, for they do not have these opportunities. And how much does the Quran speak of the merits of taking care of those who have a vacancy in their lives? وَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ, and so on and so forth. The verses are endless. He begins to teach her how to count. He says, "My beloved Zainab, say one." Say wahid, one. She says one. He then says, "Good. Now say two." She says one. He says to her, "My beloved Zainab, say two." She kept saying one. He says, "Zainab, why don't you say two? I know you know the answer." She said, "Father, how can I say two with the tongue that said one?" Emphasizing her love in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These would be the seeds that have been planted in an early year, Sayyida Zainab alayha salam, which blossoms throughout the days of Ashura. Because look at her devotion to Allah on the days of Ashura. She will be leveled with accusation and allegation that what you experienced wasn't the action of men and women, rather God. What did Ibn Ziyad tell her? كَيْفَ رَأَيْتِ صُنْعَ اللَّهَ بِأَخِيكِ. Well, how did you see what God has done? So there's always a cause to blame. God is behind all of this. Our trouble in life, brothers and sisters, is not sent by Allah unless it is sent with wisdom. Allah cannot be a good God except that He trials us in life. This is the definition of objective justice. It would not be justice to say, "I make sure no problem will come to you." You would be a bad parent. You want discipline. You want obstacles, tribulation, because that is how you grow. And subhanAllah, even on a fundamental level, the Quran says, do not feel embarrassed. I don't feel embarrassed to give an example of the mosquito, that Allah has no istihya. And يَضْرِبَ مَثَلَ what? Ba'udha, for example. Doesn't have any shame. Look at the insects in this life. Look at the camel. Look at all of these. Take some wisdom. Look at, for example, the butterfly. You know how it goes through a chrysalis phase before it turns into this lovely creature with beautiful wings, blossoming and flying. Before then, it was a small worm, a caterpillar, negligible. In that phase, when after the weeks go by and it's trying to break free, scientists say do not help it break free. Why? You'll see it struggling for hours, sometimes even a few days. It's done, the wings have developed. but let it struggle. Why? It's in this moment that the insect, subhanAllah, look how Allah puts wisdom everywhere. When it's struggling, it's like it's working out. It's exercising its wing muscles. If you help it, it lacks that opportunity and it would shortly die afterwards. No pain, no gain, a wise man once said. And you see, in this exact situation, Allah, when He dispatches trouble to you, maybe it's not trouble. Maybe it's to help you get stronger. As we see in the beautiful narration by our fifth Imam of Ahlul Bayt, Al-Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh, that the example of a believer, مثل المؤمن كمثل الميزان. The example of a believer is the example of a scale. كل ما زيد في إيمانه. However much iman they have, زيد في بلائه. They will have trouble in life. They will be struggling. Why? Because you're passing all the tests. You need to get more of these problems to face. What kind of teacher would a teacher be if he or she giving you the easy answers, or rather the easy questions and easy answers? You naturally, when you develop, the test has to develop with you. Hence why we see in the story of Prophet Musa in the Mount Sinai incident, when he comes back down, he sees them worshiping a calf after he literally split the bloody sea in front of them. Bloody metaphorically and literally, the Red Sea. And then he's combuzzled and just paranoia is going on. Pandemonium is happening. I just did all this. What's going on? The explanation happens. This man by the name of Samiri built a golden calf. He said, hey, worship it. They said no. They passed that test just by order. Then suddenly it started to make noise. He built it in a way where he would have holes intricately made inside, such that if wind moved and was going around, it would make a loud sound. When they heard the noise, after they first refused his command, then they bowed down to it. Musa alayhi salam said, because he is Kalimullah, he can communicate to the heavens directly. He said, Ya Allah, as for the calf, it was built by a Samiri, I understand that. But as for the wind, it came from you. Samiri didn't put a fan or something or blew into it or anything. The wind is yours, Ya Allah. You did this technically. Why? The response came back from the heavens that, oh Musa, they passed the first test, so we made it more difficult. Had they probably passed that one, who knows? I would have made it walk and see if they would believe in worship and worship. But the more you develop, the more proportionately God has to put you struggles. Think about it now. Have you seen problems in your life lately? Don't say, why are you giving me this? Say, Alhamdulillah, maybe this is a sign I'm working right. Of course, God, if He gives you easy problems, maybe then you should check, what am I doing wrong suddenly? But at the same time, Allah is wise. If He gives you easy, it's mercy. If He gives you difficult, it's mercy. فَالْحَمْدُ Rabbil Alameen. Now we look at the one character, I've never seen this in Islamic history, who was literally called the mother of all trials. al-Masa'ib, Zainab. Now we reflect on that character. When she was subject to that position where she was told, what do you think God did and how do you feel about that? We all know the enchanting reply she gave back. She replied first a philosophical response. We usually skip that one and we go to the other one, I saw nothing but beauty. The philosophical one was, first and foremost, the men who have free will did what they did. But with respect to God, whatever He does is glamoring and beautiful. فَمَا رَأَيْتُ إِلَّا جَمِيلًا. And as a result, I saw nothing but beauty. Salamullahi alayha. She gave a free will predestination explanation suddenly. She dropped it right then and there. Because in life, people ask this question, is the suffering I'm going through predetermined, or is there a wisdom behind it, or is it just the fact that I made a faulty decision? Many in society and philosophy have debated this, and I'm not going to even bore you with this discussion. But our masters gave us the answer as they do, because you're not a perfect religion, except that you address everything in life. And we see from narrated by the sixth Imam of Ahlul Bayt, they ask him, is it predetermination or is it free will? And free will of the like, such as whatever I do, that I made the decision. Or is it something that I can never decide? Allah has always written, you will have this happen. And the Imam replied clearly, it's a matter, إِنَّمَا هِيَ أَمْرٌ بَيْنَ أَمْرَيْنِ. It's a matter between two. There is free will in life, brothers and sisters. And there is predestination. As for the free will, right now you decide to come and ask the question, is there free will and predestination? Think about that. You decided to ask that. As for predestination, did you get to decide where you were born? No. Did you get to decide the color of your eyes? No. Oh, you might change that later in your life. But did you get to decide your parents? No. How about you give another example? He says, stand up. The man stood up. I guess in that narration, they were sitting down in their halaqa classes. In those early years, they would sit. It was like the early hawzat in the masjid of Rasulullah. He said, stand up. The man stood up. He said, now you decide, please lift one leg. The man lifted one leg. He says, now lift the other leg while the first one is lifted in the air. He says, I cannot. He said, as for the first one, you have the free will to lift it. But while it is in the air, it is predetermined. You will never lift the second one while it's on the ground. Free will and predestination. Amrun bayna amrayn. There you go. Ahlul Bayt gave us the solutions in life, but they are sometimes hidden gems. And that is not Ahlul Bayt's fault. It's our fault. Look at Zainab alayha salam in that very delicate, critical moment, dropping bombs of wisdom, subhanallah. But this is no surprise, because she was tenured by the most knowledgeable of her era and society. We see that after the passing of her grandfather Rasulullah and her mother Lady Zahra, she was 6 years old. She began in the early teenage years. Many do not know this in her timeline, subhanallah, and sadly too. She began in her early teenage years a regimen of teaching Islamic classes. You can find this clear cut. The Tariq of Ibn Ishaq, which is a non-Shi'i Tariq, the Tariq of Mas'udi, which is again non-Shi'i Tariq. But it doesn't matter because we've all came to a consensus. Zainab is unique, alayha salam. She began a regimen of teaching classes. Literally. On Monday, she began to teach tafsir of the Holy Quran to the women of society, which shows us never, ever, ever, never neglect or be negligent about the potential of the women of your society. I remember there was a very famous, was it Napoleon Bonaparte, who said, give me mothers and women, I'll give you a nation, because of the influence that is there. And unfortunately in the world today, I don't even want to enter the world of politics right now, although it is my degree, but I don't want to go that direction. Many people have restricted the access of ilm and knowledge to their women. Recently, I believe maybe in Afghanistan, elsewhere, they were banned from going to universities. Why? Because apparently it's against the Sharia al-Islamiyya that women cannot pursue an education. That was not what the Holy Prophet instilled. He said it literally, feminine and masculine. Talabul ilm, pursuing knowledge. Faridatun is an obligation. Ala kulli mu'minin, upon every mu'min believer, wa mu'minah, and female believer as well. He could have said ala kulli mu'minin, and that means male and female, because the ayat of the Quran, they are synonymous. Wal mu'minin, you hear that, you think, what, is it just the men because it's masculine? There's female and there's feminine. And in the language, the Arabic language, like French, like Spanish and all the languages, there is feminine and masculine here. But when the Quran wants to stress that, no, specifically, particularly sisters as well, it will separate mu'minina wa mu'minat. Suddenly, the Prophet said, pursuing knowledge upon, he didn't say Muslimin too. Mu'min, if you want to be a real believer, seek ilm, seek knowledge. And he expanded more. Talabul ilm, pursue knowledge is what? Utlubul ilma walau fi-Sin, even if you have to go as far as China. Relative to that time, that's very far. And still today, it's like the corner of the world practically for most places. Go search, pursue knowledge. Lady Zainab did so, and she did not hold back. On Mondays, tafsir of the Quran. On Tuesdays, tajweed of the Holy Quran. Many people neglect that. Tajweed. Yani she began to recite in that melodic tone to the sisters of her society. She would see them as her sisters, as her daughters, as her aunts and mothers. Everyone can come and get an education. And it doesn't matter how old you are. If you think it's too late, the boat hasn't even left the dock. Go again and search. One of our ulama, by the name of Siraj ad-Din as-Sakaki, in the 15th century, He was about 60 years old at the time. 60 is not old, by the way, just FYI. I guess back then it's considered old. But 60 can be old in the sense where, I'm too old to ride a roller coaster, right? I'm too old to go on that horse. Fellas, give me a break. No, I mean, no matter how old you are, you're always a child at heart. Think of it like that. He said, look, I'm too old to go and study Hawza specifically. You keep saying I'm too old, then when is too young for you then? He said, I'm too old to study Islamic sciences. He was a locksmith by trade. He was a person who created locks. And back then that was a profession because it's very intricate to design something that small and put a key into it and make it work. One day, the king of his era, he called him forth in Baghdad to design him a lock that could go in front of his main room in his palace of the time. I believe it was the Seljuk dynasty, if I'm not mistaken. He brought him forth, he did it. The king was so happy with what he did. His advisor was walking by. The advisor looks at Siraj ad-Din next to the king, and the king looks at him, and the man says, who is that by you? The king, because he's so happy, he says, إِنَّهُ عَالِمٌ جَلِيلٌ. He's a great scholar. Siraj ad-Din, this planted it in his heart. Am I a scholar? I didn't think I would be ever called a scholar. You know what? Let me give a crack at this Hawza thing, this Islamic studies thing. Let me try it. The push began suddenly. In his 60s. He goes. At the time, they were teaching the fiqh of Abu Hanifa, the Hanafi Imam for the Sunni school of thought. He went there. He sat, because in Baghdad, Abu Hanifa is buried next to Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. He went. He sat down. He sat. He sees 13-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 19-year-olds next to him. He's like, yeah, that's okay. Ilm, knowledge, doesn't have an age. You can't put a expiration. Let me sit. And so he's listening to the teacher speak, and the teacher says, listen, tomorrow I will test all of you on what we were taught today. And this is the test. If in Islamic law, if you tan something, it becomes tahir. Say, for example, if you get skin of an animal that's najis, if you make leather out of it, does it become tahir? Not in the school of Ahlul Bayt, but in the Hanafi school of thought, yes. That you could take dog skin, for example. Here, let's just give an example. And if you tan it and it becomes leather that you could wear, it can become tahir, pure, not impure, because dogs, if wet, can be contaminated, najis, and then if you tan it, it becomes tahir. He's like, remember that tomorrow. The fiqh of Abu Hanifa is if you tan dog skin, it becomes tahir. Got it? Tomorrow. The next day he comes back, and then the teacher begins to question and test the students. He says, now I'm going to ask you about what we learned yesterday. Siraj ad-Din is sitting down like this. He's like, let me see what he's going to do. He picks on him. You, what did we talk about yesterday? Tell me the principle. He said, well, if you tan the skin of Abu Hanifa, he becomes najis. He flipped the words around. The students around him began to laugh. The teacher was like, what are you? Are you sick? What are you saying? Abu Hanifa's our imam. Tan his skin? He got so embarrassed, he left. He left. He's like, you know what? This is exactly my issue. Old age. There has to be an age limit for ilm here. He walked outside. He walked and he saw something unconventional, but it still worked with him. He saw a waterfall. On the side of the waterfall, a small one, there were drops of water dripping away from the flow of water, just dripping. Where the drops were falling was a rock. In the middle of that rock, it was concaved like this. He's thought to himself, how long and how many years did it take for the water to run over that rock, such that stone will bend over water after time. Time will do everything for you. You just need a little bit of it, not even a lot. And he said, you know what, let me get back at it. He went, he continued to study, and eventually he produced one of the most valuable books of Islamic fiqh and comparative fiqh between the madahib called Mafatih al-Ulum that is taught today in the Hawza. It's totally fine. There is no age cap. There's no age limit. There is no gender limit as well, male or female. I mean, last time I checked, the famous hadith by Jabir bin Abdullah al-Ansari, known as Hadith Kisab, goes like what? عن جابر عن فاطمة أنها قالت دخل علي رسول الله في بعض الأيام. Sayyida Zahra had disciples that were men, Jabir bin Abdullah al-Ansari. Given the befitting context and circumstances, women can teach men better than men can teach anyone else. Why? Because it's a mind that is untapped, unfortunately, restricted. Do not underestimate the knowledge of women, believing women. Given the correct circumstances in society, where they are not restricted, they can be beacons of hope. Zainab alayhi salam was that. Imam Ali didn't turn around and say, Zainab, what are you doing? Unbefitting. No, she was a source of ilm in her society. Tajweed, she taught recital of the Quran. Many would think that's not necessarily a subject worth teaching. Not to her. Read the Quran beautifully. Tafsir on Monday. Tajweed on Tuesday. Aqa'id on Wednesday. Theology of the Ahlul Bayt, she would teach. No one was left behind. And on Thursday, she taught Islamic law, all on her own accord in the city of Medina. When Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam moved to Kufa, again, look at the relationship between the father and the daughter. Something unmatched, brothers and sisters. I recall when she moved with him, even though she was married at the time by Abdullah bin Ja'far al-Tayyar, her cousin. When they moved, she says, I need to be with my father here. She went and supported him. When he was struck in his mihrab, he was panting and hurt, salamullahi alayh. He was being carried by his two sons, Al-Hasan and Al-Hussein. He then said, cover me suddenly, stand me up straight. Why? Zainab is going to see me. How much did he love that she would not have her heart broken seeing her father in this state? Amir al-Mu'mineen didn't care about the rest of the society. But for her, I need to make sure her heart is not broken, because there will be a day her heart will break. Let me be a source of ease for her. And if you recall, on the night of Qadr, where was Imam Ali breaking his iftar? Where was he, alayhi salam? In the house of Sayyida Zainab, salamullahi alayha, steadfast like no other. That is why she became a beacon of hope that rings true until today, brothers and sisters. Every major problem you see in the world today, Lady Zainab can answer it for you. What are the top 3 problems on the planet today? Just think about it. One of the major ones is a refugee issue. We have a refugee crisis. Another major one is homelessness. Another major one is war. Another major one is poverty. You know all of these things. War, refugee, homelessness, poverty. Lady Zainab went through all of them. She, at one point, a foreign person in the land that she never wanted to go to. In fact, and went to twice. Once by force, second by force. Lady Zainab was a captive twice, brothers and sisters. Many people ignore that. That after the event of Karbala, returning back to Medina, she then returned back to Sham, hence why she's currently buried there. But we notice that in those trips and journeys from Kufa to Sham and back, no one tended to her or the other women of that society. Pretty much, basically, practically homeless as well. Anyone, if you see homelessness, they can take strength and garner strength, and as you should too, from the example of Lady Zainab, and help them for the sake of Lady Zainab as well. Refugees, we can all resonate with her if we can take from her lessons today. And unfortunately, in the fields of gender studies or women's studies or feminism studies, we don't see the name of Zainab placed forth like we do among other names, sadly. I recall one time there was a meeting that was held between me and a few friends in DC. We were sitting in a cafe and we were talking about future projects. The person that was coming and giving us our order was a waitress. And she heard us talking about Islam, something Islam. I don't even remember exactly what it was, but something Islam. She came by and she said, oh, you know, I've been looking into Islam recently myself, non-Muslim individual, and we were happy to hear that from her. She said, and I have one of the biggest role models from your Islamic books. I adore her. I said, who? She said, Aisha bint Abu Bakr. Why exactly? Because I am majoring in gender studies. And you know what gender studies can be about? The exemplar women who broke social taboos, correct? As an example, despite the patriarchal societies, why exactly do you adore and love her and see her as an example? She replied, because she raised an army of men as a lady, and she fought men, and boy did she fight serious men. Yeah, which serious men? You know, think about it. Yeah, okay, she raised an army, but who did she raise that army against? That is against the agenda of what it means to be a pious, up-bearing woman, let alone human in the time, when you fight the imam of your time. Let alone, brothers and sisters, we have yet to do enough research and share and disseminate about the example of Zainab alayhi salam. Whereas she raised men to fight other men, Lady Zainab fought every man of that society, resisted them, and until today, who remembers any of the killers of Karbala? But who till today remembers Zainab alayhi salam? All of us, lovers of Ahlul Bayt altogether. But unfortunately, in these fields, in these studies, rarely is her name mentioned. In fact, that's not her fault, that's our fault. We should be doing more, inshallah ta'ala. Lady Zainab alayhi salam, when returning back to Medina, listen, the revival of Fatima emerges. She began to give sermons in Medina al-Munawwira about the tragedy of what happened in Ashura. Typically, what is seen as a male-dominated field, and I know culturally this is haram, haram, haram. No way can a lady be outspoken when men are listening. Even in the case of Aza, if it wasn't for three women, Zainab, Kulthum, Sukaina, we would not hear about the masab of Hussein. We recall that in Akhbar al-Zainabat of the book of Yahya al-Ubaydili, a scholar who was alive during the time of Imam al-Sadiq, between him and Zainab alayhi salam are 4 narrators. So he says, I heard from this man, who heard from his teacher, who heard from one more person, from Zainab, really close to her era. He mentions that when they returned back to Medina, Imam Zain al-Abidin said to his beloved auntie, oh my auntie Zainab, it's okay. You will speak about the tragedies. I will cook for you because you are too tired right now. And Imam Zain al-Abidin began cooking. You know the khidmah that we do when we cook and give to the Zuwar of Imam al-Hussein? This sha'ira and this symbolic gesture was instituted by the Ahlul Bayt themselves. And Imam Zain al-Abidin began to cook for his family when they were too weak to even stand up at that time. And I recall, outspoken to such a degree that the governor of Yazid at the time wrote him a letter and he said, if you have any desire to accomplish in Medina, first get rid of Zainab because she's about to start a revolution. Notice wherever she went. In Kufa, sermon. In Sham, the mother of all sermons. In Medina, it was about to be flipped 180 like that. And that is why Lady Zainab alayhi salam, if you notice, we mentioned in the beginning, she was born 1 year after Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. So on the day of Karbala, how old would she be approximately? Say 56. She died a year later. She died the exact same age of Imam al-Hussein. Interestingly, Imam Aba Abdullah, Imam Zain al-Abidin, Imam al-Baqir, and Sayyida Zainab all didn't make it past the age of 56. Look into their history. 57 rather, pardon me, 57 years old. Everyone who was alive in Karbala, they couldn't live beyond the years of one another. It shows you the effects and impact that tumultuous, arduous day had on these individuals. But that did not stop them. She began to be outspoken. When she did so, the letters were sent to Yazid in Sham, get rid of her. It's the whole idea of keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. For Zainab right now is the biggest enemy to your kingdom, Ya Yazid. And so he took her. There are a number of traditions as to where he brought her. That is why you will notice there are a multitude of graves or shrines for Zainab alayhi salam. There are 3 primarily. One in Baqi'. It is said by the predominant Sunni narrative that she is buried in Jannat al-Baqi'. The evidence for this is very little, to be fair, because the command of and the style of that caliphate is you always get rid of someone wherever they're outspoken. So it is unlikely that she stayed in Medina. The second is in Egypt, Cairo. The third is Sham. And the Shami opinion is the one that is strongest today. But what would take her to Cairo? And in fact, we have more narrations that she is buried in Cairo than we do in Sham. But we have more examples of personal experience of Sham, but we do also have narrations there. But why would she be even associated with Cairo al-Qahira? Because in Cairo, the biggest confidants to the establishment at the time were in Cairo. Think about it. Amr ibn the killer of Amir al-Mu'minin Abdurrahman bin Muljim was from Cairo. Amr ibn al-As was the governor of Cairo. Many of those who had a great affiliation with the government of Yazid in Sham began in Cairo. That's why when they sent, for example, Malik al-Ashtar, Amir al-Mu'minin sent him to Cairo to represent him, they killed him. Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr in Cairo, they killed him. There is a hatred, unfortunately, that started from there. Not today necessarily, but back then indeed. And so one tradition makes mention in Akhbar al-Zainabat, sent her to Cairo. Now it doesn't stop there. When she got to Cairo, the tradition says she still kept being outspoken. And even in Cairo, they began to cry that Zainab alayhi salam, the granddaughter of Rasulullah, has come to us today. They received her by making fun of her. She began to speak again. Notice, wherever she goes, she always changes the hearts of society. They then venerated her. When she died, they built that beautiful darih that is there. Till today, they call it Maqam Sayyida Zainab, or Sitna Zainab alayha salam. You also have Maqam Sayyidina al-Hussein in Cairo as well. Then is there an issue when you have these multiple places to go and do ziyarah? There is no issue. If people want to remember her there, if people want to remember her in Sham, go right ahead. Who's going to stop you from loving Ahlul Bayt? And if you want objective truth and history, many of our ulama say, go and visit them where you personally believe, based on the evidence that your heart understands with the history of the ulama and the seerah of the Ahlul Bayt, go and do ziyarah. The strongest case, potentially, is the evidence in Sham because of this issue. You notice one of the companions of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, Hijr bin Adi al-Kindi, when he was sent to Sham, he was brought by the orders of Muawiyah, and over there he killed him. Yazid played the same rule, bring her to me. And he brought her in Sham. The second time she went there, hence why Imam Zain al-Abidin says that what was the most difficult situation for you? Of course, through all of this, must have been Karbala. He replied, no, not Karbala, Asham, Asham, Asham. Because it didn't stop when we were taking there the first time. Zainab had to go back. And I can only imagine what that's like for someone like her. That she goes back to the same place where she saw humiliation after humiliation. It's not easy. But look at the mountain of strength and patience that she was. On the day of Ashura, she would help all the women get saddled on the horses and camels. She was the only one that had no one to help her. Where typically Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam would lift his beloved sister, raise her on that horse or that camel, whatever it may be, to prevent from taking this long journey by foot. She helped all the young girls, all the women, and the elderly herself. None came and helped her. She had to endure the journey by herself, walking, salamullah alayha. And when she went, she made sure that she was steadfast in front of the entire family. She would resist shedding any tears. She did not do so because she was the rock to all of them at that time. Hence why Imam Hussein brings her. He has many children, many siblings, brothers and sisters. He picks her specifically. And this has been, by the way, a study many will do and have done and never reach a conclusion that is satisfactory to every single person. Why he chose specific people over other individuals. He could have picked his brother Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah, who showed his might on the day of Siffin. Many will say, well, he was probably sick. Many will say that he wasn't unwell. He could have picked Sayyida Zainab's husband to come with us. Abdullah bin Ja'far, her own husband, didn't go. Some will say, wait, if all the men go, who was going to stay with Bani Hashim any longer to continue to represent the men at that time? If they all just die like that, that's probably one reason. But there indeed is a hikmah. There is wisdom here that he picks her because he sees her the most qualified. After me, it's going to be you. You will have to carry the reins, irrespective of you being a woman. In fact, you being a woman is the exact reason why. Let us set the example, Ya Zainab. Let us say, whenever there's a sister embarrassed to wear the hijab, she can think of Zainab alayhi salam. When they would snatch the hijab off, she held it on. I remember, isn't there that beautiful noha? Jabrida sar se chani, ma sada de tirahi tuna aya. Ghazi, even though that happened with me, it doesn't matter. I held my hijab because it became the symbol of Islam on that day. They came to rip off the hijab of Zainab. Rather, hataku hijab Allah. Everything that Allah brought down to conceal, they removed, she stayed firm. Sisters today, the excuse back then was what? I'm not ready maybe. It's not my time yet. I don't feel confident. Now it's I'm scared from the Islamophobia that is there, from the hatred. I tell you, was there anyone who was more ready than Zainab when she was as scared as she probably was in Karbala? Rather, she wasn't scared. She stood firm. She saw the children scared, but she cannot be in that state. Why? Because if everyone falters, who will stand? And if you fall for everything, you stand for nothing. Hence, Imam al-Hussein took her. That is why, no surprise, Imam Zain al-Abidin said the following lines, Ya Amma, oh my beloved aunt, Anti alima, you are a scholar, غير معلمة, without ever having been taught by anyone. To the degree that you know knowledge, these are things we are astonished that you speak of. وَفَهِمَ غَيْرُ مُفَهِّمَ. And you are learned and you contain so much of that fahm and aql and logic without anyone in your place to come and teach you. Hence why she attains that status of the greatest heroine in Karbala alayhi salam, after Imam al-Hussein, the greatest hero of Karbala. Today, both men and women should take her as an example, should see that no matter what adversaries you have, think of Zainab alayhi salam. You see yourself in a poverty-like situation, afflicted with pains financially, society hates you, you can resonate with Lady Zainab alayhi salam. No one hated her like the society of her time, yet she was still outspoken. Foreign in a land you're not from, many of us come from places far away, resonate with Sayyida Zainab. She was foreign in multiple lands, eventually died in a foreign land to her, but she still stood firm with her principles. You all have a Zainab inspiration inside you. You have that Zainabi principle. Do not let go of it and say Alhamdulillah for that reason. No matter what oppression you see in your life, it is a sign that you're getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For Zainab showed us exactly that. But I recall that on a day like today, the Lady Zainab alayhi salam, alone in Sham, they say that when a mu'min and mu'mina leaves this world, that Allah dispatches for them the most beloved for their sake to see them before they leave. I don't know who she saw before she left this world, salamullah alayha. Was it Imam al-Hussein? The hadith is clear. Before the believer leaves, they will be approached by whom they love the most. And who does she love the most? Was it Aba Abdullah in that last moment of hers? Or was it Fatima Zahra? Was it Amir al-Mu'mineen? But no doubt Abu al-Fadl is definitely on that list. I don't know who. And before that, when she arrived in Sham, she would see that beloved daughter of Imam al-Hussein, Sayyida Fatima al-Alila. Sayyida, they call her Sukayna al-Sughra. She looked at her aunt and she would say, who are you giving me condolences? I don't know why she didn't recognize her aunt. Maybe because of all that she witnessed in Karbala. She said, it's me, your aunt Zainab. What did you see in Karbala, Ya Zainab? Such that your own niece has to ask, who are you? And of course, who would she ask for? Auntie, where is my father? And what happened? Please begin, inform me. And Lady Zainab would break down, alayha salam. But before all of that, a woman would stand by the gate of Medina and she would ask, tell me about the news in Karbala. I need to hear what happened. And that was none other than Lady al-Baneen, alayha salam. She would stand by the gate. The man, Bishr bin Hadlam, came and he broke the news. Ya ahla Yathrib la maqama lakum biha. قتل الحسين بكربلاء فأدمع مدرار الجسم منه بكربلاء مضرج والرأس على القناة يدار. O people of Yathrib and Medina, Hussein has been killed in Karbala. Know that news. His body lays in Karbala and his head is held on the sky, in the spear held to the sky. For my tears, they will always flow. Al-Baneen hears that. She goes to him. She says to him, tell me exactly what happened, O Bishop. He says, and who are you to ask so clearly about what you want? She says, it is me, Al-Baneen. He says, O Al-Baneen, I know what happened with you and your family. He said, عظم الله لك الآج باستشهاد ولدك جعفر يا البنين. O al-Baneen, may Allah reward you over the martyrdom of your son Ja'far. You had 4 on that day. She said, do not tell me about Ja'far, tell me about Aba Abdullah. He said, عظم الله لك الآج باستشهاد ولدك عثمان. She said, do not ask me about him. I do not worry about him. Tell me about Aba Abdullah. He would continue, عظم الله لك الآج باستشهاد ولدك عبيد الله. She said, tell me about Aba Abdullah. Then he said the line, عظم الله لك الآج باستشهاد ولدك أبا الفضل العباس. She was holding the son of Aba al-Fadl. When she heard that news, she dropped him and began to say, Wallah, you broke my heartstrings. She collected herself and the boy. She then said, tell me, I beg you, about Habibi Hussein. When he broke the news of what happened to Aba Abdullah, she ran back to her home. Then she heard Zainab has now returned to Medina. She went to the home of Lady Zainab alayha salam. Sayyida Bibi Fidda was at the door, subhanallah. She prevented anyone from entering the house of Zainab as per her request. Zainab says, I want to mourn by myself. No one should come right now. Then she hears a knock on the door. She opens and sees it's Baneen, Abbas. She then returned to Zainab. She says, my lady Zainab, you said do not let anyone inside. What about if at the door is Baneen, Abbas? She said, let her in, for she is one of us, Ahlul Bayt. When she brought her in, Baneen ran to Lady Zainab, calling out, Wa Husayna. What did Sayyida Zainab Yarat when she looked at her? She said, Wa Abbas. Baneen hugged Lady Zainab. She hugged her back, and Baneen had one question. She said, tell me, did my Abbas make me proud on that day? She said, Wallah, he gave so much. Wallah, he gave his eye. I beg you, listen, he gave his eye, that's more than enough. But do not be shocked. He also gave his left and his right, Ya al-Baneen. Don't worry. Abbas stood there when all was left. He made us proud, and wallah, he made the heavens proud as well. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. Brothers and sisters, let us recite the ayat 5 times. I had a few requests to remember some of those who are ill and unwell. Many of our community members here are unwell, but subhanallah, they do not want to tell you that they're not well. I've heard stories already, face to face, from many of our wonderful community members, men and women, and the diseases and the illnesses they are going through, but they don't want to talk to anyone about it. Really breaks the heart. Be gentle with those around you, brothers and sisters. Be God conscious and pray for all those who are not well. Let us recite the ayat 5 times. لِشِفَاءِ الْمَرْضَى, for the sake of Marid Karbala, Imam Zain al-Abidin, all together. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, all together. أَمَّن يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَا وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ أَمَّن يُجِيبُ المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء. All together. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء. اللهم اكشف السوء والبلاء عنا يا الله. اللهم المرضى المنظورين شافي وعافهم يا Allah. Oh Allah, we ask you to grant us the ziyarah of Lady Zainab al-Kubra in this dunya. We ask you to grant us her shafa'ah in the akhirah, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, all those who have requested have hajat and desires, oh Allah, bestow upon them your greatest of barakah, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, we ask you to raise us with Muhammad and Muhammad on the day of judgment, Ya Allah. And for all those who we did not mention, for the ulama and the shuhada, and those who do not have anyone to remember them, Rahimallah man qara surat al-Mubarakat al-Fatiha. But before it, the loudest of your salawat. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman. Brothers and sisters, a few parting words, inshallah ta'ala, and I will not take any more of your time, no more than a minute. Alhamdulillah, this is our concluding night for this series. We began by celebrating the birth of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and tonight we honored his daughter, alayhum as-salam. One thing I would like to mention throughout my experience and the tawfiq Allah has blessed me with going around and speaking in many communities across North America, Canada, and in Europe, I have yet to see such a wonderful congregation of mu'mineen and mu'minat like the example here in Allentown. No matter the circumstances, whether it was cold like the first day, if you remember, how cold was it? It was really cold. Some of you blamed me for bringing the cold from Michigan, I remember. No matter how cold it was, no matter if we don't have a permanent home, we will always make sure we honor the affairs of the Ahlul Bayt as per their request. The Imam Rida says, Rahimallah man ahya amrana. May Allah have mercy on the one who revives our cause. And I have seen that there is not an occasion in the Islamic calendar except that this wonderful community does it. Be it picnics, be it masa'ib, be it wiladat. It is an archetype of an example. Continue on this way. May Allah bless you and protect you. And of course, you will endure obstacles. But what did we just say about obstacles? That is a sign of your closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for your sake and for our children's sake, let us be more tolerant, patient, compassionate, and loving for one another. And let us make sure that happens with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. اے زینب میری بہنا، اے زینب میری بہنا، اے زینب میری بہنا، اے زینب میری بہنا، قافلہ ایک میں لایا تھا، قافلہ ایک لے جا زینب، قافلہ ایک میں لایا تھا، قافلہ ایک لے جا زینب، راستہ مشکل ہے تو کیا، راستہ مشکل ہے تو کیا، ناد علی دوہرا زینب، قافلہ ایک میں لایا تھا، قافلہ ایک لے جا زینب، قافلہ ایک میں لایا تھا، قافلہ ایک لے جا زینب، میری دعا ہے ساتھ تیرے، غم نہ کر جو ہاتھ بند ہے، ساتھ میرا تھا کربل تک، جانا ہے اب شام تجھے، ایک وظیفہ ہو تیرا، ایک وظیفہ ہو تیرا، ناد علی دوہرا زینب، قافلہ ایک میں لایا تھا، قافلہ ایک لے جا زینب، قافلہ ایک میں لایا تھا، قافلہ ایک لے جا زینب، لے کے علم تو غازی کا، آج سے خود غازی بن جا، تو بھی علی کی بیٹی ہے، صدموں سے گھبرانا کیا، رک نہ سکے پیغام میرا، رک نہ سکے پیغام میرا، ناد علی دوہرا زینب، قافلہ ایک میں لایا تھا، قافلہ ایک لے جا زینب، قافلہ ایک میں لایا تھا، قافلہ لے جا زینب، آنسو پہنچ لے دامن سے، آج گزر جا مقتل سے، میری بہن ہے تو زینب، صبر کی منزل دے کر لے. لاکھ مخالف ہو یہ ہوا، لاکھ مخالف ہو یہ ہوا، ناد علی دوہرا زینب. قافلہ ایک میں لایا تھا، قافلہ ایک لے جا زینب. قافلہ ایک میں لایا تھا، قافلہ ایک لے جا زینب. بال سکینہ جب روئے، میرے بنا جب نہ سوئے، اس کو تسلی تم دینا، پہنچے گا آرام مجھے. سن لے میرے دل کی یہ صدا، سن لے میرے دل کی یہ صدا، ناد علی دوہرا زینب. قافلہ ایک میں لایا تھا، قافلہ ایک لے جا زینب. قافلہ ایک میں لایا تھا، قافلہ ایک لے جا زینب. صلوات اللہ محمد وعلی محمد. متوجہ زیارت. السلام علیکم یا رسول اللہ، السلام علیکم یا امیر المؤمنین، السلام علیکم یا فاطمۃ الزہرا، السلام علیکم یا حسن المجتبی، السلام علیکم یا حسین شہید بکربلا، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ. السلام علیکم یا علی ابن الحسین زین العابدین، السلام علیکم یا محمد ابن علی الباقر، السلام علیکم یا جعفر ابن محمد الصادق، السلام علیکم یا موسیٰ ابن جعفر الکاظم، السلام علیکم یا علی ابن موسیٰ الرضا، السلام علیکم یا محمد ابن علی التقی الجواد، السلام علیکم یا علی ابن محمد نقی الہادی، السلام علیکم یا حسن ابن علی العسکری، السلام علیکم یا صاحب العصر والزمان، الامان 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 من فتنة الزمان، السلام علیکم یا شریک القرآن، السلام علیکم یا کعبۃ الایمان، السلام علیکم یا امام الانس والجان، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ.